Tonight we're delighted to have Colm O'Brien with us. You're very welcome, Colm.
Thank you very much, Pat.
Thanks for coming.
Excited about it.
So, I mean, we're looking forward to hearing all about Carambola Kidz and that fantastic company you're running at the moment. But let's go right back to your upbringing in Dublin. Did your parents spot your entrepreneurial qualities? Did you show signs early on? No.
Happy to call myself a citizen of Limerick now, but when I was growing up, regular background, mum and dad, mum always worked within the home and dad always worked for somebody else, was an employee all his life. And so there was no sort of entrepreneurial stuff going on. And I got to sort of fifth year in school and my buddies were talking about they want to be engineers or doctors or lawyers or whatever. And I was thinking, I hadn't given it any thought. I was just having great crack in school. And so decided I wanted to be a school teacher because the hours were short and the holidays were long. That was it. And set my sights, well, it's true that I set my sights on going to St Pat's in Drumcondra, but I never got the honour in Irish because I didn't do the work. And so I was sort of thrust out into the workplace, stumbled into a job in a restaurant in Cleary's department store. The plan was to study Irish at night, do a grind at night and repeat the leaving the following year. But I started earning the few bob and I found that I'm reasonably good with people and I began to enjoy the work in the restaurant. And when you enjoy something, you tend to get interested. If you get interested, you tend to get on. And it led me on this entire crazy career. Managed Bewley's in Grafton Street back in the early 90s. And then took on the Bewley's franchise. Some of you will remember here in Cruiser Street. Came down here in 1998 with my wife, Aileen, who's here this evening. And convinced her we'd go down here for 5 years, make a few bob, and then look at our options thereafter. And almost 20 years later, we're still here and love it.
Brilliant. So that transition from sort of a career in catering for a number of years, managing Grafton Street, and you introduced the lunchtime theatre.
That's right,
I believe there, which is great. And what happened then? What was the change? Did you take on like a franchise for Limerick initially before you started your own business?
Yeah, the change was in my head really. That was, I sort of woke up at one stage in that period. This was the early 90s, and thought to myself, you know what? If I don't do something different, because it had all just evolved, and I hadn't really given it a plan, and I thought to myself, I began to ask myself, why do some people get ahead and some people not get ahead? Because there was no entrepreneurial background at home. The thing to do was go get a job and work hard. But I realised that for me, it was getting a bit tiresome. It was hard work. The cafe business is hard work, and it's relentless. And it was the exact opposite to teaching. It was long hours and short holidays. So I sort of decided at one stage in my early 30s that I needed to grab a hold of something and begin to study the principles behind business. And that led me on this journey. We got to a point in our mid-30s, I suppose, where we decided, let's jump ship and come down to Limerick and take on the Bewley's Cafe franchise down here. And that's an interesting one. It was big enough down here, the Limerick, those that will remember it, was a big enough facility and big enough therefore for me to have a team to work with, because I'm reasonably good at the team and I'm not particularly good on my own. So that was important to me as part of the decision-making process. But it was this deciding to finally bet on myself and step out into the world of being in business. And it's been a bumpy road ever since, right?
And how did you find that initial transition? Was it challenging?
It was very tough, yeah. What I found really interesting was, I thought this was 1998, and I joined the catering industry in 1980, so this was almost 2 decades in. And I'd been running restaurants and cafes for people for years.
Bobby Kerr was one of your bosses?
Bobby Kerr was one of my bosses, that's right, in Bewley's back in the day, yeah. And but managing Bewley's in Grafton Street, big busy place. I think we'd 250 staff, right? And then I became the franchise manager for Bewley's Cafes, and I opened the Bewley's Hotel at Newlands Cross. That was myself and Bobby Kerr brought that to market. And all this tons of experience, right? And then we took on Cruiser Street up way here, and I was scared stiff. I couldn't believe it. On the Monday we were to turn the key and open the door, I was absolutely petrified. Couldn't justify it to myself because 2 decades of experience running for somebody else, but all of a sudden running this for myself. And all these.
What year was that?
1998.
So the Celtic Tiger was starting to roar, yeah?
It was, yeah. I've never forgiven it.
Okay.
We'll get to that in a few minutes. If that's,
so it was a good start, right?
It started well.
The economics at the time
were
favourable.
Yeah. It started well, yeah. ended painfully, but started very
Okay.
well, yeah. And it was, Cruiser Street was coming into its own, Limerick was coming into its own. Rising tide lifts all boats and all that. And I suppose with my background from Bewley's, I lived, breathed in 8 Bewleys for years. So, I was well positioned to represent their brand. I'm a huge fan of brands, huge fan of systems and brands, because that's what sets you apart from the competition out there. And so even with all that experience, for me to step into the world of being self-employed for the first time, it was important to me to have the safety of a brand that was bigger than me. It wasn't Colm O'Brien's cafe, it's a Bewley's cafe. The brand was bigger than the individual,
Sure. And at what stage then did it transition to your own business?
to the current business.
No, was it always
sorry,
as Bewley's, or did that become something else?
No, it was a Bewley's, yeah. It was opened by, I was the franchise manager for Bewley's before I took on this role, and there were 3 business partners down here in Limerick, 3 independent business owners from Limerick who had bought the franchise rights for Limerick, and so they opened it in 1992, I think, was when Cruiser Street was built effectively, and we took it on in 1998. Just the timing was right for us, timing was right for them, etc.
How did the sort of recruiting differ when you were recruiting for your own business than when you were a middle manager in Bewley's? Did you have a different mindset when you were recruiting people that if they didn't work out, you would personally maybe suffer? You know what I mean?
We needed people. One of the challenges for sure in that business is when you need people, you need them now. You need them tomorrow, this Saturday. We have a function and we don't have enough people. So. And the type of work, was interesting. I was talking to somebody earlier before the event, and we're talking about the type of jobs that LIT, for example, are training people up for, and they're higher value up the food chain roles, which is wonderful. The catering industry is it's not necessarily at that level. It's and a huge number of the people who come through the catering industry, I'm quite sure a lot of professionals in the room here have at some point served coffee or made toast in different places, because it's if you like, a rite of passage. Mm-hmm. But I mentioned earlier that I love brands and I love systems, and the 3 keys from my perspective in terms of business are a good brand, great systems, and even better people. Because at the end of the day, for all of us, it's somebody on our team is representing us out there with the customer. So you need really great people.
Right. Okay.
And not everybody we hire is going to be really great. That's just par for the course.
Mm-hmm.
We just got to sort of accept that and move on,
Okay. And growing the business then, can you talk us through how the restaurant went from the good times when the economy was beginning to really sort of grow, and then the challenging times in the middle, and how you came out the other end?
Okay. It was great at the start, right? It started we came here in 1998, June bank holiday weekend, opened the doors and drove it on. And I mentioned, a huge soaking in the Bewley's brands. We were able to create a very credible Bewley's experience here in Limerick, and in fairness, the Limerick people bought into that. And we had a great number of years, and it was really chunking along fabulously. And then that was sort of 98, 99 into 2000. Our business had grown by maybe 30% in that period. Not all because we were doing a great job. We were doing a great job, but it was the economy, it was the Celtic Tiger, it was all those things. And then it began to turn, and I talk about it in my book, a perfect storm of events that for the first time really taught me that it almost doesn't matter how hard you work or how good you are at what you do. At times, stuff can happen outside of you. Excuse me. And so it started around the turn of the century. There was a marked decline in volumes of sales because the Bewley's fare, for those of you here in the audience that will remember, was bacon, egg and sausage, big mugs of white coffee, real tea, etc., right? Real butter. And the market began to change, and the millennials wanted paninis and wraps and lattes and cappuccinos. And Bewley's wasn't known for that, right? And so Bewley's began to change, but as a brand, it was a bit like Titanic. It couldn't change fast enough to be credible in this new marketplace. So the market began to dip for us. Bewley's nationwide, not just here in Limerick. The second thing that happened specifically here in the Midwest was foot and mouth disease. And when it hit, Limerick trades on the hinterland, and the people in the regions were told not to go into the city, and they didn't, right? Listened to the government for once and didn't come in. And our business dropped by 20%, quite literally overnight. It was like somebody turning off the tap. And then the third element in the perfect storm was 9/11, because that hit later in 2001. And of course, the Americans never came back into Shannon. And so our business was declining, dropped 20%, and then stayed flat. And we were really beginning to struggle at this stage. But the final nail in the coffin was what I, if I may refer to as, no, better to say, the Celtic Tiger. And the Celtic Tiger was roaring at this stage. But the Celtic Tiger, all it did was push up the paper value of properties, right? And we argued with our landlord that he was looking for too much rent. It went to arbitration, and he was awarded a rent of €1,000 a day, selling cups of coffee. Love the gasp. €1,000 a day selling cups of coffee and rashers, sandwiches that people didn't want anymore. So that was it. It was game over. That was 2003, backdated to 2002.
Wow.
Painful time. So we knew it was game over, and we began in earnest to try and reinvent ourselves, which led us.
So you were staring into the abyss.
Yeah, and nothing we could do except keep pushing through.
How did that feel?
We got through it, thank God. Yeah, we did a lot of hard work, a lot of faith. You know, you just gotta keep believing that something will crack open. You know, there was no way that the restaurant was going to survive, not at that rent level. I mean, Bewley's in Grafton Street, my alma mater, actually closed a month before we did. Same reason. Like our rent went to 313,000 here in Limerick, right? Theirs went to $1.5 million, right? And so it's.
So all your experience up to then had been in catering. Were you looking for another avenue of business, or were you looking at an alternative catering business, or how were you approaching that?
Catering being my background, that was the most natural thing to do. So what we did was we actually rebranded the Bewley's Cafe there to Cruises Coffee Company, or Cruises Cafe at the time. We got the name from the street, obviously. And we took that concept and created a small spin-off. Do you know the kiosks on the Liffey Boardwalk in Dublin? So we brought the Cruises Coffee Company to there. And the basic plan was weather the storm here. We had to try and get out. We put the lease up for sale and finally got out in 2005, but we were battered and bruised and significantly in the financial hole. And but I imagined, because of my training, that the right thing to do was to form a sort of a franchise, for want of a term. And we set up Cruises Coffee Company, and we had these kiosks, and the game plan was to turn that into a brand and a system and expand. It didn't quite happen like that, but that was the starting point.
What was your next departure then from that?
Well, it was interesting because it was around that time that we had this very fortuitous turn of events, right? Because we were based in Limerick, and because the kiosks were in Dublin, I was up and down regularly on the train. And this is where the story takes a turn thankfully for the better, right? The cafe was dying for sure. We just needed out. We needed to try and have something that we could salvage from it. And was on the train one day and met a man on the train, famous man on the train, and we swapped business cards, as you do. And mine was a Cruises Coffee Company business card, and you know, we passed them to each other. And he looked at mine and he says, "What does this mean?" Because I had a strapline. It had my name and phone number and email address and whatever. And I had a strapline which said, "How can I help?" ? And he said, "What does that mean?" And I said, "Oh, that's my offer to the universe." I said, "It'll mean something different to the next fellow I give my card to. It is simply, you know, if I can be of help, great. If I can't, I can't. But if you ever pick up the phone and you're looking for help with something, if I can point you in the right direction, I will. Simple as." And he said, "That's very interesting." And he put my card in his pocket. Never heard from him again, right? And I never gave it any thought. But about 3 months later, his boss rang me from Limerick and said, "You met a man on the train, you gave him your card, it says, 'How can I help?' I see you're in the food game." He said, "Are you interested?" He said, "Your man has left the organisation, so he doesn't work here anymore, but in that period he gave me your card. He said, if you're ever doing something in the food game, this guy O'Brien's interesting, give him a shout." He says, "We're going to run a pilot project for healthy school lunches in Moyross. Are you interested?" Thinking, am I what? Of course I am, because we needed to do more trade from our cafe. So we started supplying school lunches 14 years ago to late 2003 to Corpus Christi in Moyross, our first school, and we supplied 27 lunches. And sitting here this evening with you, which is wonderful, today we supplied 25,000 lunches in one day. So
congratulations. One day,
25,000 lunches from 27 lunches in day one. But that all came because of the man on the train and the little strapline, "How can I help?" So I'm a huge fan of being out there and networking. No idea. We were talking to some people earlier. No idea who you're meeting or what connections are being made.
Serendipity.
Serendipity, but I also think it's important to point out that even though, and I think this is a mistake we make in networking generally, we tend to say, here's my card, what can I sell you? Here's my card, this is what I do.
Yeah.
Here's my card, do you have any need for my service? The thing that allowed him go back to Limerick and say to his boss, you need to talk to this guy, is I said, here's my card, how can I help? Nothing to do with business, nothing to do with, there was no agenda whatsoever. So my keys to successful networking are, in my opinion, and I suppose in my experience, you have to be out there first and foremost. It's preaching to the converted here. Everybody that's here is here, right? Have to be out there. You got to be out there doing your thing, because he was never going to knock on my door and say, I see you're watching Coronation Street, I've got this great idea for you. That could never have happened, not possible. You got to be out there doing your thing. And the second thing, in my opinion, is you need to be out there to genuinely be of help. Yeah,
Paying it forward.
I heard you say earlier about Workbench. I might get this wrong, but it's about making friends. I can't remember the phrase that you used, but
well, it's the startup grind. One of the values is making friends, not contacts, which is very much in keeping with that philosophy.
Perfect,
yeah,
thank you. Yeah.
And that's very much a Silicon Valley thing too. In the startup community, there's very much that feeling of paying it forward, that it'll eventually maybe come back on you, but that's not the reason you do it. Yeah, I totally agree with that. As you went through your various businesses, you did it all on your own. A lot of companies will have a co-founder or more than two people. How did you find that? Did you ever find that a lonely experience? Not having someone to share your ideas with, or maybe to bounce them off. Does it mean you have to have a lot of confidence in your, if you believe in something? Or
no, well, I suppose I had my wife Aideen, who was shoulder to shoulder with me all through the thing. Like I had convinced her. She had been working with the bank actually before we left Dublin, and gave that up to take on a role in the cafe. And then we were all embroiled in the failure, if you like, of the business. And that's important to point out. We didn't fail; our business failed. Now it was a very painful time, not necessarily easy to get back up and dust ourselves off, but we did. So Carambola was born out of necessity. I was looking for something, didn't know what it was going to be. I definitely knew I wanted it to be a business, and it almost didn't matter what type of business. There's a distinct difference between somebody who owns a business and somebody who's self-employed, and too often people confuse those two. So for me, going back to, it needed to be something that had enough potential for me to build a team that would eventually run it. So today, 25,000 sandwiches, lunches were made and sent out there, but I didn't make any of them, thankfully.
So, we often compare with sort of Silicon Valley in the States and the tech world, and the attitude to failure being kind of positive there, that, sort of bank managers or whatever won't take people really seriously until they've been through a failure and can bounce back. Do you think we're getting any better in Ireland? It used to be a stigma, if you fail, it was like a bad thing. Are we getting better?
I hope so. Truthfully, I think people who step out into business for themselves, I think they lose sleep at night at times wondering, could this all fall apart? And it all fell apart for us. Worst nightmare stuff, right? But once we got past it, once it had failed, once we got past it, once we knew nobody died, thank God, we'll survive, we'll come out the far end. There was huge, I always remember believing or feeling that I actually became a man after that failure, because I realized, what, we'll sort of survive anything. Interestingly, the thing that hit me most, right, this is going to sound terrible, the ego is a terrible thing. I had a beautiful Volvo V70, fabulous machine, right? And we went out to one of the garages in the Dock Road and sold it for cash, and I drove out in a little Opel Corsa. Seriously, right, smaller than my mother's, right? And I was thinking, but you know what, once I got past that, so the point is, we're afraid to fail. But we need to fail. We don't know what we're made of until we fail. None of us learn anything. I mean, I regularly talk to groups of kids and groups of business owners and whatnot, and I talk about Munster Rugby way of example, right? So the guys go out and they play their hearts out, and then the scoreboard on the day doesn't allow them a win, okay? And do you think they go back sucking their thumbs and back to mammy and crying? They don't. They go back in on Monday morning or whenever, and they switch on the video and see what went on,
Mentorship. You've been really generous with sharing your knowledge, and I know for the Bank of Ireland's TY Academy and for the Job Care people recently you offered your services. In your own career, how important was mentorship, and have you got people you remember in your early days that sort of inspired you?
Yeah, for sure. It's I think mentorship is often not and doesn't have to be structured. It doesn't have to be we're sitting down for an hour, we're going to go through an agenda. I was talking with Maria earlier about an idea that I'm working on at the moment, and which I won't name just tonight. But the basic idea is that if we have experiences, and all of us have different experiences, well then, why wouldn't we make ourselves available to somebody else who's following, in some footstep or other? So, if I go back to when we started, we hadn't a clue. I mean, we'd no clue. Just had this idea, managed to talk to the guys who own the franchise here. They managed to introduce us to their bank. It was all everybody helping everybody, but we had no idea. So move on 20 years, that was 98, so this is almost 20 years. We have a lot more experience, a lot more grey hair, right? But a lot more experience, and so I'm seeing lots of people. One of the things that I think has really been positive about the recession that we've just come through is it forced people out of their comfort zones. Our failure in the cafe forced us out of our comfort zone. It was very easy to run the cafe. Been doing it for decades at that stage. Do it in our sleep, right? Forced us out of our comfort zone. I think the recession has done that. And I'm a huge fan in people beginning to bet on themselves. If we can do it for somebody else, we can do it for ourselves. The question is, do we have the appetite for doing it for ourselves? And I go back to what I said earlier, that there's a difference between somebody who owns a business and somebody who becomes self-employed. One of the reasons why I stayed working for somebody else for so long was I really didn't want to be self-employed. I really didn't want to have to go back to the tools, for want of a phrase, and have to work every Saturday afternoon serving coffees and whatever, because I was getting older, right? But I began to study the difference between self-employed and business ownership. I thought, you know what, self-employed mightn't cut it for me. Business ownership is very interesting. I wonder, could I learn the skills? So this mentorship thing is about I just offer, how can I help? How can I help? Can I have a cup of coffee with you? Tell me what's going on, based on what you tell me is going on in your business or your life that you're willing to share with me, and you're asking my advice. I'd say, well, if I were you, based on what you told me, I might suggest the next step might be.
Yep, great. Just picking up the thread then on Carambola Kidz. Why did you call it Carambola Kidz? And from that initial 27 sandwiches, was it, in Corpus Christi School, can you take us through from then to now in terms of the business growth and what you experienced along the way?
First question, Carambola Kidz, where did the name come from? It's interesting that this is a local event because you'll all know that the people involved or the businesses involved. We had the cafe in Cruiser Street, and our neighbours were the Maloneys, who had in-store, yeah, and they had the very small in-store. Some of you remember it on Ellen Street, tiny little one in the basement. And they came up to us and said, we're opening our flagship store on the next street over, I think, or I'm not sure, Denmark Street, Ellen Street, I can't remember. Would you put a coffee shop in there for us? And we said, sure, why wouldn't we? Makes perfect sense. So went to our accountant, who was an old school friend. That's how the whole thing sort of started. And said, these people have asked us to do this. And he said, well, look, you're sole traders at the moment. You need to set up a separate company, and we'll run it through this separate company. I said, fine, can you get us one of those? He said, yeah, we'll do. Got a piece of paper in the post which said, you're the proud owner of the Carambola Limited, right? I thought that's a very funky name. Threw it in a drawer, got about our business. That didn't work, that particular cafe, and we ended up shaking hands with Maloney's and saying, look, it's a loss leader for us. It's a loss leader for you. It's getting people into your store. It's not working for us. Let's just shake hands and move on. Of course, they're the people behind Hook and Ladder now, so they're delighted about that. But so the Carambola Limited was simply a paper company that the universe sent our way. Roll on a couple of years and we got the 27 lunches. And when that began to show promise, because once we go back to brand systems, and people, we no brand at the time, it was just our school lunch thingy. Once we got it to work, the systems, we took to the next school, the next school, the next school. And then we realised the cafe was going to close. We took a premises in Raheen, and I went to Cork with my dad, who happens to have a background in sales, and we made our first sales into Cork. I was driving the van up and down to Cork every day, and I said, well, I'm not going to be driving the van with no name. I want to get some value out of the drive. So took the bit of paper, it said Carambola Limited, Carambola Kidz, that'll work. Then I Googled Carambola, and Carambola is the star fruit. And I thought that was really cool. So we created this trademark, which is a twin star. I wanted to be a single star originally, but Heineken objected. I know they didn't, but I was afraid they might. And so we did the twin star, and it was originally to be, the gold star that you get for being good. That was the plan. And then it became a twin star. It became pink and blue for boys and girls.
Carambola Kidz.
Carambola Kidz was born, yeah. And we started with 3 people, and we have 120 people today. So it's been good, interesting.
So you expanded from Limerick, various schools throughout Limerick, then Cork, and then the rest of the country eventually over.
Yeah, we've pipped shows to the post. We're nationwide.
And do you do all your own deliveries? Do you do your all? Is anything outsourced? Is it all done by yourselves?
It's a combination. It's a good question. Combination of and we've had different models as we've grown over the years. At the moment, we have we operate from Anacott. And if anybody wants to come out for a visit, more than welcome. Pick up the phone and we'll show you around the place. Say again? By appointment only, yeah. And we've about 15 vans. We supply 200 schools now, from Letterkenny to Dingle and from Dundalk to Wexford, and everywhere in between. And we have a fleet of 15 vans and 3 refrigerated trucks. So we sort of produce all the lunches today. So 25,000 lunches get produced today. They're all individual, by the way. So if you were all having a Carambola Kidz lunch, you'd all have your little bag with your name on it, your individually chosen menu. That's what we specialise in. When we started out, the industry was, look, it's Monday, you're getting ham, right? And it's Tuesday, you're getting corned beef, and it's Wednesday, you're getting whatever, right? And we decided it had to be done better. So we didn't look at what the competition did, we looked at what the market needed. And we built the system which allows 25,000 kids have 25,000 completely different menus every day of the week.
Do they order individually, directly themselves, parents?
Parents do, yeah. They log on and they give us Little Johnny's menu for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then our systems take over.
Brilliant. And have you seen like an evolution of people becoming healthier over the years, parents asking for particular products and stuff?
Yeah, it keeps changing.
Does it? Yeah.
The choice is phenomenal now. And of course, Ireland has changing. So we brought in halal products and all sorts of stuff. Back in the day, the choice, when we started out, was, you could have ham or cheese. If you're vegetarian, you didn't have ham,
Yeah.
So it's moved on phenomenally.
And have you come across many competitors over the years that have just kind of come in with the cheaper versions, like holding your brand and holding that marketplace? How have you dealt with that?
It's a challenge. It's a challenge for sure. And we led the charge. Truthfully, we were the disruptors back in the day. I even had a competitor of ours was a former colleague of mine back in Bewley's back in the day. And when we were both senior managers with that organisation, and he sort of rang me up one day and sort of said, what are you doing? You're stepping on my toes here. And I said, look, there's loads of opportunity out there for us all. So we sort of raised the bar. We got into this individual choice, every child, every day. And he was thinking, thanks very much. You're upsetting the apple cart here. And then he had to follow suit. And then other people began to see. Cork, for example, was interesting because I was up and down every day doing the deliveries. And after a period of time, another supplier turned up in Cork because they saw the van coming in and said, what's that going on? And that just happens. So you just got to keep going. You've got to keep innovating. You've got to stay true to what your brand values are. Sure. And then the competition will compete in their own way. Competition will compete on price or whatever, bringing in cheaper stuff to whatever it might be. We've tried to stick to our values. And
I know then you branched into the motivational speaking, which I know you were always interested in that. How did that come about and how's that going for you?
It's like everything, it sort of evolved. The cafe went well for a while, then failed. The school lunch thing took, we started in 2003, had the head down for the first 5 or 6 years just to make it solid and have it growing the way we needed it to. And then sometime, probably, 2017? So probably 2010 or thereabouts, I got a call from, I introduced Bobby Kerr, my friend Bobby Kerr, at a talk in Mullingar. And I was the sort of MC at Carroll, and I introduced Bobby, and he was the guest speaker for the night. But I managed to say a few words myself. So somebody came to me after that, a lady who had a training business, and she said, I go in and I train these start your own business programs, or the enterprise boards. She said, would you consider coming in and telling your story to these start your own business groups? And I said, yeah, why not? So that was the first gig. And I went to it and I sort of stood there in front of these quite nervous people, right? And I was thinking, the worst thing I can do is stand up and say, listen, it's going great, thanks very much. So I decided that the best thing I felt I could do was say, it's going well, but let me take you back to all the stuff that we went through. And it became this warts and all journey, which people began to identify with. And so that went on for a number of years. I was turning 50 in 2013, and I had this bucket list thing, I want to write a book. So that's where the book Feeding Johnny came from, which is effectively the talks I was giving expanded to fill a few pages. And then that in turn then has led to this, people that have read the book sort of said, do you know what, would you sit down for a cup of coffee? And that's turned into mentoring, motivation.
Congratulations, you shared a stage with Tony Robbins at the Pendulum Summit this year.
Well, as it happens now, that's a misnomer. No,
Well, it might have been on the stage at the same time, but it was the same stage, right?
No, yeah, it was the same. It was the same stage, but Tony was the year earlier, so.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was 2017. Yeah.
Okay.
I was somewhat cheeky, but I managed to finagle my way onto the stage for.
How was that experience?
Gosh, it was wonderful. Yeah. Somebody said to me, "Were you nervous?" And I said, "I was, because I only had 2 minutes." You know, if I'd had 15, it would have been,
Right.
I would have felt I had something to say. But I told the man in the train story. That was.
Brilliant. It's a great success, the Pendulum, for Frankie Sheehan, isn't it?
It's great. Yeah.
Before we go to Q&A to the audience, I'm sure people will have lots of questions. Colm, could you share like your top 3 tips for startups? If someone was starting up tomorrow, what, from your wealth of wisdom from your experience and ups and downs of business, what would be your top 3 tips?
Top three. Start. It's the first one, right?
Do it.
Do it. Start. There are too many people who say they're going to start something, someday they will, eventually I might, and it'll never be perfect. I'll give a quick example if I may. Some friends of mine came to me a few years ago here in Limerick, and they wanted to start a festival, Elemental Festival, some of you will know it. And they sat down with me and they said, listen, thinking of starting this festival, this was say April time, I'm thinking of starting this festival and it's going to be this, that and the other. I said, great, when are you thinking of starting it? And they said, well, September, 12 months. And I said, why September? And they said, well, end of the summer. And I said, well then, why not this September? Oh, we couldn't, Jenny Mac, you know, we're not ready. I said, lads, do it this September, because it's going to be, you're going to make a dog's dinner of it anyway, right? You really are, honestly, no matter all the planning, right? It'll never be like the picture you have in your mind, right? So do it, and then rather than worrying about it for the next 12 months, what it's going to be like, fix it over the next 12 months. So they did, and that's gone well since. So, so the first tip is start. Second tip is know what business you're in, and know what business you're not in. And I'll give you a quick example if we're here for time, are we?
Yeah.
A quick example. We make sandwiches to supply school lunches, okay? But we're not a sandwich company. But lots of people confuse us as being a sandwich company. And a guy came to me from Dublin back in the early days. We're 10 years in Anacotti, so this was the first 3 years we were out in Raheen at the time. Excuse me. And he said, would you make sandwiches for us for our school canteen business? We've got these canteens and we'll buy sandwiches off you and we'll sell them in our canteens. And I said, why not, you know? Seemed like a good fit. So we started making sandwiches and rolls and wraps and all the rest, and spent 6 months doing R&D and sending samples out. And he drove down, we had a meeting in Finnegan's one morning. He drove down and he wanted to do a deal, and he was potentially going to spend 350 grand a year with us, potentially, right? And I went to the meeting and I was uncomfortable for the week leading up to the meeting. I was thinking, there's something not right with what's going on here. And I went to the meeting and I said, it's been great, but we can't be your provider. And he was stunned, right? Because we needed the business. And I said, I've realized that we're not a sandwich business, we're a school lunch business. And the school lunches that we make, the individual lunch bags, we can knock them out, you know, by the new time, brilliantly, perfectly all the time. So we can produce 1,000 lunches in the same time it takes us to make 100 of what you need for us. So we realized we're not a sandwich company. And so therefore, when you're starting out, it's too easy to say, oh, there's a bit of business going on over
Distracted,
here. Oh, yeah, we could do that too. We could do that. We could do that too. And I think a lot of startups fail on those rocks.
So focus on your core product.
Figure out what you're about.
Great. Yeah. Makes
And
sense.
as importantly, realize what you're not about.
Okay.
And be very disciplined.
One more.
And the third one then is keep going. Never give up. I put a blog out there last weekend called I Love Peter Stringer, because I love Peter Stringer, right? And the reason I love Peter Stringer is He's officially too small to play rugby, and he said, I don't care. Right? I want to play rugby, it's my life, okay? And he did, brilliantly, and club, regional, and played for his country, right? And I use him in my talks as somebody who just didn't give up, because you're going to have the naysayers, for sure. On that point of never giving up, when people are starting out, right, they're very vulnerable. We all were. And we've got to be very careful where we get the advice from, where we get helpful tips from. Friends and family, absolutely in the main, love us, don't want to see any harm, want to protect us from ourselves, right? And they oftentimes can knock the stuffing out of your dreams. Oh, who do you think you are now, Pat, to be doing that? Oh, I know a fella now where that didn't work, right? So it's really important for startups to never give up, but to be careful where they get their advice from, be careful where they listen to their advice from. So if we use by example, your brother-in-law who's saying, oh, Pat, I don't think that, Janie Mac, whatever about your man O'Brien doing that, I don't know about you, right? But if your brother-in-law, there's no disrespect to civil servants, right? If your brother-in-law has been sitting in an office, in a civil service office for 25 years, he's got an opinion, but it's not valid. It's not valid, right? If you bring the same idea, your startup idea, to Richard Branson, and he says, Pat, you know what? If anybody can do it, I reckon it's going to be you. 2 bits of advice, exactly the same idea, exactly the same promoter, but the advice is being absorbed by a person with a very different life experience. Is that okay? Yeah. So really important for startups to sort of protect that bubble and figure out, and they need advice, we all need advice constantly, but to find somebody who's trodden the path before you.
Brilliant. Three really good tips. Thanks for sharing them.
Pleasure.
And before the fire behind me goes out, because it might go out if I talk much longer, we're over the hour. Let's just pass over to Colm, and thank you very much for coming tonight. I really enjoyed your insight.